Yeah.
Go live now. Hi guys, sorry about the delays there. I'm just going to turn you off a minute, Sam. Okay, sorry about that. Welcome to the Pact Coffee live stream in depth about the V60. Today we're going to be talking about the V60, specifically brewing with it, brewing one of our delicious coffees. But if you've got any questions, please do feel free to drop them into the comments section to the right. And Sarah's going to feed those through to me so that we can answer anything as we go. Hopefully, we're going to go into enough depth here today. You won't have too many, but do feel free to drop anything in about the specific coffee, about the V60 brewing method, or about how it differs from other brewing methods, like, for example, the Clever, the AeroPress, or potentially the cafetiere. What I wanted to talk specifically about today is why the V60, this is a lovely Pact teal one, is so much better than other brewing methods, but especially so much better than a cafetiere. For me, one of the biggest bugbears of making coffee in the morning is that I come downstairs and I might have brewed a coffee yesterday and maybe I was being a bit lazy and I didn't actually clean out my cafetiere yesterday. And the last thing I want to do before I've got to start making my coffee in the morning is get all the grounds at the bottom of it, try and make it clean, get it tasting good. As you're going to see at the end, when I'm done with my V60, it's very easy. You just pull the paper out the top, drop it in the bin, and I can put my V60 away nice and clean, ready to go again for tomorrow. And it's a really fantastic part of the brew. The other fantastic part of the way that the V60 brews is this filter paper. Now, this is really, really important. Normally, when we brew coffee using a cafetiere, we're using a metal filter in place of this paper filter. Now, metal filters can't be made quite as fine as these paper filters can, the mesh between each individual strand, but also the advantage of a paper filter, it has the ability to absorb some of the lipids, some of the fats that exist within the coffee. So it takes those out and it makes sure we don't get the tiny, tiny fines of coffee. Now, what happens when we brew with those is that they trap the aromatic volatile compounds, which are what we call the things that make flavor in everything in the world, but specifically in this, in coffee. They trap those aromatic volatile compounds in the liquid and they stop them shooting up around your olfactory bulb. And those movements around your olfactory bulb, the little pings of chemistry that go on back there, are what create the sensation of flavor. So the sensation of flavor in this particular coffee from Neurocaesar is going to be black currants, blackberry, and pineapple. In other coffees, it might be chocolate. But essentially, all those flavors are things that aren't sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. All those pineapple flavors, all those really interesting, complex things come from flavors. So we want to make sure they get out of the liquid. So by brewing with a V60, we're going to give the coffee the best possible chance of displaying those characteristics to us. So, to brew a V60, we've always got to make sure we've got our filter paper ready. I'm using a Harrier V60 paper. This is a 2-cup V60 paper. And as you can see, before we start brewing, I'm going to fold it like so, along this line, so that when I drop it into my V60 here, it sits nicely against the rim. If you don't fold that crease of the V60 paper in line, what you're going to find is it doesn't quite sit nicely in the V60 itself. So that's ready to go. Today I'm going to be brewing into a V60 carafe. That means I can use my V60 to brew multiple cups of coffee at one time, or if I need to, I can use it to brew an iced coffee. I can put ice in the bottom of here, change some of the parameters, and I'll explain to you how to do that once we've gone into the brewing phase. I'm going to drop my V60 on top of my carafe with my filter paper inside. I'm going to switch my kettle on. Now today, my kettle is set to 95 degrees centigrade. What that means is the water's going to heat to 95, but when we pour the water from the kettle, what we should be seeing is a bed temperature closer to 93 or 94 degrees centigrade. If you're using a kettle without a temperature setting, like the stage where I'm using here today, you can heat the water to boiling point. It's actually going to heat to about 99 degrees centigrade. And if it's a metal kettle, within about 30 seconds, what you're going to find is that will have dropped down to around 95. If it's a plastic kettle, you're going to need to leave it for more like a minute because there's more insulation in that plastic. It's going to stop the heat escaping. So give it a minute to cool down because you want to be extracting the coffee at the correct temperature. Now, lots of people think if you heat your water too hot and brew with brewing water that's too hot, you're going to burn the coffee. Actually, coffee is roasted at close to 200 degrees centigrade. It'd be very difficult to burn coffee given that it's already been roasted at 200 degrees centigrade, and that's the temperature we've used to create the delicious tastes and flavors that exist within the coffee. What we're actually doing if we use water that's too hot is we're drastically over-extracting the coffee, which creates bitter tastes in the drink, and that gives the image of burnt, but it doesn't actually burn the coffee. We're just over-extracting it. So if you can make sure you're always brewing your coffee it's close to kind of 90 to 95 degrees centigrade. If you feel like you're getting lots of bitter flavors, you might be needing to reduce your temperature. If you're getting lots of astringent temperatures, like a very young red wine, that kind of drying sensation down the sides of your tongue, that means it might be astringent, it might be under-extracted. You want to bring your temperature up a little bit. This is all assuming your grind size is right, which is the perfect time to come on to grind size. So I've got my grinder set up over here. Today I'm going to be brewing with Nyara Caesar. This is a Rwandan coffee from a cooperative called Brew. It was set up by Epiphany. Oh, my bag is not quite open there. Set up by Epiphany over 20 years ago now. Epiphany is an absolutely wonderful woman. The initiative she's put in place with the Brew Cooperative, I've seen her awarded titles and commendations for just being amazing. She's an amazing woman. She's won International Africa Awards for really moving forward some fantastic things. She's really helped women within the industry in Rwanda, although Rwanda is already way ahead of many countries globally in terms of their gender balance and on what they do for it. But yeah, absolutely fantastic coffee. So this is from the Nyara Caesar washing station. This is a washing station that collects coffee from local farmers. So each individual lot could have parcels of coffee from up to 1,000 different farmers, but the reality is most of these farmers have around 200 coffee trees, so they couldn't actually produce enough coffee to even produce kind of one sack of coffee. So what we do is we portion those farmers into small communities. We collect the coffee from those communities. We take them to the local washing stations. So all the coffees we buy from Rwanda will come from individual washing stations. And then within that washing station, we've collected this specific lot from a specific region. And that region, or that community, we've been able to funnel the extra proceeds back into to make sure they're earning money based on the quality of coffee they produce. So I've got this coffee in the grinder anyway. So I've got my grinder over here set up to a medium grind. On my stove, that is a setting 41. What you should find, it's very difficult. Lots of people will describe grind settings based on saying they like sand or they like anything else. Sand comes in lots of different sizes as well as coffee. So what I'll do is I'll bring the grind nice and close to the camera so you guys can take a look in just a moment. Today I'm going to be pouring, when I get onto brewing, from my kettle itself. You may be used to seeing people pouring from things like this, the gooseneck kettle. Now, earlier on I mentioned the issues with brewing with water at a specific temperature. Now, if you look at the design of the gooseneck kettle with this long gooseneck, this actually becomes a conductor and radiator of heat when you pour hot water through it. So although we can control the temperature of the water in our gooseneck kettle, the reality is when we start pouring the water, we're losing heat as it moves along the spout, and that makes our brew much more inconsistent. So I'm not going to be using my brew kettle today. If you're going to use one, make sure that the whole kettle is really hot before your brew water goes into it. So if I'm using that, I heat that on my hob, but today I'm going to be using my electric kettle because you're going to be able to see a lot more when I use it. So I'm going to move this forward a little, and I'm going to come forward and just show you the grind and tilt the camera down a little just so you can see exactly what I'm doing now. So get my hot water over here. This has been on keep warm, so it's nice and hot. there. Okay, so our grinds. Let's get a nice close here. I don't know if you guys can see that, but this is our medium fine grind. I'm just going to tap the camera a touch. Oops. There you go. So there's our medium fine grind. If I come back here, hopefully you're going to have a better view of what's happening in here. Now, today I'm going to be brewing the coffee. Traditionally, we recommend that you stick to 60 grams of coffee per litre of water. Now, that's because it's the most accessible way for people to really get into tasting coffee. It's a ratio that is used quite widely within the industry, and it's closest to the kind of coffee ratio that you're going to be familiar with. Now, if you're buying a filter coffee in a shop, in a cafe, the likelihood is, especially over the last 20 years, the ratio that they will have been using is closer to 40 grams per litre. So jumping up to 60 grams per litre is quite a jump. But the 60 grams per litre is based on a range of 60 grams per litre to 80 grams per litre that was deemed acceptable during scientific studies that were started. So I'm just going to cite that. So scientific studies that were done in the 70s and 80s. What they did was look at consumption of coffee in North America, in Europe, and specifically in Scandinavia. And they looked at the ratio in which people were willing to brew coffee. Now, the UK was found at that point to have one of the lowest brew ratios in the world. So, as I said, closer to 40 grams per litre. In the US, they were looking at closer to 60, 70 grams per litre. And in Nordic countries, you were seeing brew ratios up to 100 grams per litre. So the scientists brought everything in. They did testing across those three kind of sets of individual places. So the UK, Nordic countries, and America. Sorry, I'm doing this the wrong way around for you guys. They did the testing, and they found that within a range of 60 to 100 to 80 grams, you could find a range of extraction between 1.8% to 18% to 21% of extraction that yielded an acceptable and very good quality of coffee. So you can brew anywhere within that window. The reason we choose 60 grams is because it's closer to that coffee you're going to be familiar with. But today I'm going to brew right in the middle. So I'm going to be brewing 70 grams per litre. What we're expecting to see here is quite a drastic increase in the mouthful of the coffee, and we're going to be moving more dissolved solubles into the end cup of coffee. So that's going to help produce the increased body. It's also going to mean we've got more of those flavor volatiles in the cup to shoot up, whoosh around our olfactory bulb, and create some taste and flavor experiences for us, so we can detect what we're seeing on the front of the bag. Great. So I've got my ground coffee ready. That's a medium grind. If you're ordering it from Pact, you can just select medium. Otherwise, you need to be dialing in. I've set my sage here set to 41. That's ready to go. Next, I've got my kettle set to 95 degrees. I'm going to rinse my filter paper. Now, the purpose of rinsing my filter paper is to partially get rid of any fines of paper that might be sat. I'm going to drop this back on here. That might be sat on the paper itself, but also to make sure all the spaces between the filter papers are nice and closed up. The fibre is already saturated with water, so we're ready to brew. Next, I'm going to give this a swirl so my pot of coffee, the pot that my coffee is going into, is nice and hot, because volatile aromatics are only volatile or more volatile when they're nice and hot. So by keeping all the brewing apparatus hot, we're going to have a nice, tasty hot drink at the end. Again, we're going to give ourselves the best opportunity to taste all the delicious flavors. I'm going to get rid of the water here. Drop that on my scales. I'm going to, now my paper is stuck to the inside of my V60. I'm going to lift it out. I'm going to drop it back in. Those of you that have been camping will be familiar with the concept of keeping the two sheets of your tent separated. If the two sheets of your tent touch and it rains outside, the water's going to pass straight through both barriers and into your tent. Now, if by keeping the paper not stuck to the edge of the V60, what we're doing is the same principle. We want the water that goes into the top to run through the coffee bed and out the bottom. If this filter paper is stuck to the wall of the V60, what we're going to see is the water rushing through the sides and not going through our bed of coffee here. So make sure you drop it out, drop it back in, and you should just see, as you drop it in, the paper touching the ribs of the inside of the V60, but it shouldn't be stuck to the walls themselves. Okay. So scales on. I'm using scales today. My scales have a timing function and they have a weight function. So I'm going to be brewing 500 ml of coffee at 70 grams per litre, so I need 35 grams of ground coffee. Great. 35 exactly. Just go back over here. Next, I'm going to level this bed out. I've got a big mound of coffee right in the middle here. Just give it a slight shake to make sure we've got a nice level bed of coffee ready to be brewed. I can tear my scales again. I'm getting low battery. Hopefully we'll get the brew done before the battery is dead on these. Okay, my water's been on keep hot now. So I'm ready. I'm just going to make sure I'm not missing anything here. I'm ready to begin my brew. So I'm going to be doing a bloom. My bloom means I'm going to be dropping around 10% or 10% or less of my total brew water onto the bed of coffee. Now, ideally, I want to be dropping on 10% or less and avoiding any coffee beginning to brew out at the bottom. So, and I'm going to be leaving it once I've done that for 30 seconds to a minute. Ideally, I want to be able to, and the water's already begun dropping out, I've got about 15 grams more. So I've used 42 there, 42 grams of my total 500 grams or 500 mils of brew liquid, and I've managed to saturate all the coffee I can see on the top. The likelihood is some of the coffee in the center here still hasn't been saturated with water. So what I'll be doing is when I start my, so I've just set my timer so I can check my bloom time. So when I start my brew, after my next flush or my next dose of water, I'll be giving the bed of coffee a stir to make sure the whole bed of coffee is saturated with water. It would be a hell of a waste. There's some ground coffee sat in the middle not getting wet and not extracting evenly with everything else. So one of the key factors here we're looking at is we want to have a nice even grind size and we want to make sure all the coffee extracts evenly. If we've got a perfectly even grind size, but we get channeling and the water rushes around different parts of the coffee at different speeds, then we're going to end up with a poor brew. We're going to end up with some of the coffee grounds extracting more than others, and that'll create, although it might say, if we were to test this at the end, it might say we've got perfect extraction, but actually what we've done is over-extract some grounds and created a bitter element to the coffee, under-extracted other grounds to create an astringent element to the coffee, and not actually got any of the delicious taste and flavour we're looking for. So now we're a minute in. I'm going to pour the next 100 ml of water on the top. So now you should be up to about 150. There we go. So this time what I'm looking to do is a stir. And what you're likely to see at this point is potentially some segments of ground coffee floating to the top. So all I'm doing, north, south, east, west, twice to make sure that I've got all that coffee ground. Now, the coffee bed, the coffee liquid is about 1 centimetre above the coffee bed, and over the next 2 minutes, I want to make sure I'm just topping that up slowly to maintain that level of water. Now, by doing that, I'm going to be making sure that I also maintain the total brew temperature of the liquid. If I let it all drain out, it's going to cool down. I'm going to be adding more liquid that's going to be hotter and cool down again. I'm also going to be flushing all the water through. I'm going to be making uneven extraction. So, but just by gently keeping this level nicely topped up, I can try and control the bed of my liquid all at one time. There are some methods where you can fill it right the way up because you've got a larger mass of liquid and allow that all to drain through, but that can also leave you with high and dry grounds. So that's grounds of coffee that are levitated out upwards or floated upwards, and then they stick to the edge of the filter paper. What we're hoping for is to get all our coffee in. I'm going to do one pass around the edge just to make sure we don't have anything sitting on the edge of the filter paper. So what we want to do is make sure when we get to the bottom, we've I've got a really nice flat bed of coffee. I can see now my paper is slightly beginning to stick to the outside of the V60, which isn't exactly what I want. Yeah, almost there on a total brew liquid, and we're at 3 minutes 30. So your total brew time can be anywhere between 3 minutes 30 and 5 minutes to get your optimum brew. You can see that currently I'm at 3 minutes 30. I've still got about 50 ml of liquid to run through, so perhaps my grind is a tiny bit too fine today. So if you're finding this, you want to make your grind ever so slightly coarser. I'd say if you're using a sage grinder, that might mean moving 2, 3, 4 marks coarse on your grinder. One of the key things about learning to adjust your grind setting is to measure each of the different variables you can control. So measure the time it's taking, measure your dose, and measure the amount of water that's flowing through your coffee. If you are measuring those and you find things are changing, you can change your grind, and then you can observe what's happened and you can make further changes. If you are just noticing that your flow isn't moving quite as you thought, but you haven't verified that you've got exactly the right dose of coffee in here, or you haven't verified that exactly the time it's taking, you don't know for sure what's going to happen when you change things. So by keeping an eye on this, and this applies to your espresso, it applies to all your brew methods, by making sure you're checking your dose and your grind setting and the total extraction time every single time, you're going to be able to make full observation and be able to make changes and then observe how they've changed to test your final result. So I'm just going to grab my headphones from over here to be able to allow Sam to be able to read out any questions you've got. If you've got any questions, please do drop them in the comments section. I can't quite read them from here at the moment, so just give me one moment. Okay, so now we can just get Sam to give us an update. Okay, so we've got the coffee dripping through. Do we have any questions yet, Sam? So Jake asked, would I stir the grounds of coffee even if I was only brewing for 1 cup? I would always try and maintain a brew method. So if you are, whatever your brew method is, whether you're scaling up for volume or scaling it down, try and maintain that same method all the way through. So if you're going to be stirring, stir for 1 cup, stir for 2 cups, stir for more cups. So just try and keep everything the same. Hope that helps, Jake. Anything else? Okay, so Mark Bailey asked, I added 35 grams of coffee, but you couldn't quite hear the total amount of water that I'm adding here. So I'm brewing at a ratio of 70 grams of coffee per litre of water. Now that means I've used 35 grams of coffee to brew 500 millilitres or 500 grams of final coffee. Well, I've used 500 grams to brew. I'm not quite going to have 500 millilitres of coffee in the bottom here because our ground coffee is going to absorb probably around 50 to 75 millilitres of water as it brews through. So we're at 6 minutes down on the brew. My bed. So I'm going to just take this off. This is one of my favourite things about the V60. Really nice and easy to clean. I can open my bin and I can just drop my coffee in there without having any mess. Perfect. So let's drop that there. This is ready to drink. I'm going to put that in my cup. And I've got a cup for Jamie later on. Let's go back over here. My scales are warning me the battery's about to die. Okay, so we're ready to brew that. Were there any other questions, Sam? Okay, interesting one from George. So George is asking, how does the temperature adjust the flow rate? So this one is actually more easily seen when you're brewing with an espresso machine than when you're brewing with a filter machine. As you increase the brew temperature of your bed, what you're doing is you're giving the water, the brew water, more energy to extract the soluble liquid from the coffee itself. Now, it's very hard to look and see the difference between water and coffee, but you've got a lot more stuff in coffee itself. So the viscosity of the coffee is actually much higher. So when coffee is brewing, and as it's trying to move between the different particles, it's trying to push down, push through. If it's got more energy, it's got more coffee. The coffee has more viscosity, and it's more difficult to move. So the higher the temperature, the more difficult it's going to be for the coffee to move through the liquid. Theoretically, it should take longer for that brew to happen. Whether that's visible in a V60, I can't tell you. I haven't actually checked the timing on that. But what I can tell you is in an espresso machine, it becomes very visible. That hotter water has much more energy to extract the solubles from the coffee. And when you increase your brew temperature, you do see restrictions in flow rate. You see restriction in flow rate, which means a slower flow rate of liquid through the coffee. I hope that helps, George. So Kelly asked, if you like a stronger coffee, would you add more coffee or change the grind size? So we're actually playing with multiple variables here. What we've got is a brew box. On this side of the brew box, which looking at it is the high side, we've got 80 grams per litre. On this side, we've got 70 grams per litre. On the top, we've got an extraction of 21%, sorry. And on the bottom, we've got an extraction of 18%. Now, by changing the, you can change the strength by moving anywhere, this way or this way. This way makes the coffee taste stronger. So you can do that by making your dose higher, so increasing the number of grams of coffee used per litre of water coffee you're brewing. Or you can do it by increasing your extraction type. Or you can do it by both, by moving diagonally across the box. So what I've done today is rather than start at 60, I've moved us to 80 grams per litre, and I've used a grind size that's slightly too fine, so we're going to be quite close to the top of the box, which is going to give me a very strong brew. But yes, you can adjust the strength of your coffee either by increasing the number of grams per litre you're brewing, or by making your coffee finer and extracting a little bit more coffee, increasing your brew temperature a little bit, extracting a little bit more coffee again. But you don't want to quite go at the top of this box where you're going to start to get bitter flavors. When you start to get bitter flavors, you just want to bring your grind back, bring your brew temperature back a little bit, and you get a much better tasting cup of coffee. Hopefully that answers the question, Cal. So what was the name? So someone asked if Humungadunga asked if the filters are biodegradable. So these are just paper filters. They act just the same as kind of kitchen towel. So they can be put into your compostable waste, just like any other compostable paper product. And coffee is very compostable. If you've got any roses in the garden, get the coffee on the roses. Roses love acidic soil. I mean, I get through litres and litres of coffee, which means I get through probably a kilo of coffee in the house every week. That all gets mulched into the garden to improve the quality of my soil. Perfect. So next I'm going to be tasting the coffee. Now, this is going to sound ridiculous to all of you, I'm sure. But tasting doesn't just involve putting this stuff in your mouth and thinking this tastes of whatever. Pineapple, blackcurrant. So to taste coffee, we need to be actively thinking about what is going on in the cup. Whilst we're actively thinking, we need to be allowing the volatile aromatics that I keep mentioning to get up around our nose. So what I need to do is take a slurp of the coffee, I need to hold it in my mouth, and I need to roll it around with my tongue. The purpose of which is to coat my entire tongue with the taste compounds that taste of acidity, that taste of mouthfeel, that taste of sweetness. I need to cover my mouth in those so I can get those sensations. they're going to give me the appley acidity. They're going to give me the dark chocolate bitterness. But then I need to be breathing in and out through my nose. And that's going to be capturing the volatile aromatics, throwing them up to this area behind my nose where we smell things. And that's where I'm going to get things like banana or tomato, or blackcurrant, Swiss chocolate, all those amazing flavors that add complexity, all the thousands of flavors. And there are over 1,000 different chemicals that generate those reactions within coffee to give us the complexity of the coffee itself. So a big slurp, breathe in and out through your nose, and that's how you're going to detect the taste and flavor. I normally, and I always forget to say this, but I do it before I taste, I normally sniff my coffee to prime my olfactory bulb to let it know that there's something coming before I take my first sip. Coffee tasting delicious. That's a really good start. And I'd say when you're learning to taste, the first thing you want to be describing is your preference. Do I like it? Do I dislike it? That helps you to engage with the product itself. The next thing to do is to say, what does it taste like? Does it taste like coffee? I might do specific types of acidity in it. What's going on in here? I'm getting bright acidity. When I feel it on my tongue, I can feel it at the back of my tongue and along the sides, but not quite right at the front. So I'm getting mostly tartaric and a little bit of malic acidity. It's a little bit dry, which means my brew method was ever so slightly off today. I've got a little bit of astringency in there. The body's really nice. It's really silky. The way it moves across your tongue isn't like cream. It's not like juice. It's really elegant and flowing and light. And when I'm breathing in and out through my nose, I'm getting that really delicate pineapple characteristic and then that really characteristic blackcurrant flavor you get from wine and coffee. It's absolutely delicious. I love drinking it, and I hope you will get a chance to try it. I think we've got a few more questions coming in there. So, Sam? So Finn has asked if there's a difference in results from plastic, metal, or glass V60s. There's also ceramic V60s. So we've got plastic, like the ones we distribute. We've got ceramic, metal, and glass. Now, we can actually take this back to something we talked about earlier on with the kettles. When you look at your V60, what we're looking to do is create a bed of coffee brewing with our water that has a consistent brew temperature. The advantage of using a plastic V60 is, the advantage of using a plastic V60 is that it's not going to conduct temperature or heat away from the brew as we're brewing. It's all in there. The plastic is going to insulate the brew, and although we may lose temperature from the top, which is going to happen with all V60s, we're not going to see that happening from other areas of the V60. With your metal V60, particularly, you're going to see very high energy loss. With plastic and ceramic, you're likely to see energy loss as well. If you are using a ceramic, glass, or a metal V60, it's imperative that you make sure that when you rinse your filter paper, you're getting your V60 really, really hot, because otherwise you're going to see a massive drop in your brew temperature, which is going to result in an under-extraction of your coffee. Although it might seem like the cheapest option, the reason we use plastic is because it does produce the best results. So Kelly has asked if there's a difference in the flow rate or brew temperature for lighter and darker roasts of coffee, which is an absolutely great question. Thank you, Kelly. So when we're brewing with lighter and darker coffees, the lighter and darker roasts have much different solubilities to them. So going back to that, how easy is it to get the coffee out of the grounds itself? If you are brewing with a very light coffee, you need to make sure your brew water, has got lots of energy, because lighter roast coffees have their aromatics and all the coffee compounds trapped more within the grounds. A darker roast coffee doesn't have the aromatics and the coffee compounds trapped so well within the ground, so you can extract them at a much lower temperature. And to achieve exactly the same extraction from both products, you do need to use slightly different brew temperatures. So slightly hotter brew temperatures, 95, 96 degrees centigrade for the lighter cup roast coffees, and slightly lower brew temperatures, anywhere from 91 to 93 degrees for darker roasted coffees. And again, this applies not just to V60, but it applies to espresso as well. So someone's asked if we sell, and for the sorry, what was that, Sam? Cool. Oh, so sorry. I promised you earlier on I would show you the ice brew method. So to be able to brew with your V60 with your V60, all you need to do is replace half of your brew water with ice and put that in your carafe or your cup at the bottom. So today we would have used 250 grams of ice in the bottom of our carafe, and over the same brew time of approximately 3.5 to 5 minutes, we want to put half of the brew liquid into the top of the coffee, brew that through to the bottom, and then we're going to get the diluting effect from the ice in the bottom. Now, the thing to be aware of is whilst you're brewing like that, you do need to pour your coffee at a slightly slower rate because you've got less water to move through the coffee product, to move through the grounds, to move into the bottom and get diluted. So really fantastic, especially on the hot weekends like we had last weekend. I had some really delicious coffee, especially from light roast products. So I had the Neuro Caesar. I think on the weekend I was actually bringing Ramira shade dried washed coffee that we had as a limited a couple of weeks ago. Absolutely delicious, and those fruity characteristics, the really high acidity, work really nicely as a cold brew drink. All right, any more questions? So Jackson mentioned, Jackson said, I just mentioned the coffee was tasting a little bit dry, a little bit astringent, and what would I change to adjust that? So my flow rate moved a little bit too slow, so I would coarsen my grind. Now, astringency can be a sign of under extraction and over extraction. The dryness I'm getting now is because of over extraction of the coffee. So I've tasted this. This symptom could be the result of one of two things. But because, as I was saying earlier on, I monitored everything. What my total brew time was, I know what my dose was, and I know what the temperature of my water is. I know that I've slightly over extracted this coffee and I'm getting that astringency. So I need to make my grind a little coarser, or I need to make my my brew water a little bit cooler, so I could brew it, say, 94 degrees or 93. The easiest thing for me to control is my grind size, so I've moved from 41 to maybe 43 for my next brew, see how that goes, and then adjust based on that. Perfect. Thank you. It's been really great to have you. I hope it hasn't been too clumsy being our first live stream from home. We hope to do many more. If you've got any suggestions for other brew methods you'd like to see, please drop them and subscribe so that you know next time I'm going to do a video. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.